In lesson 3.3, we're going to take a look at microgreens crop types. And the reason I go through this is with any topic, I think there's many lenses in which you can view that topic. And so I find there's different ways of looking at microgreens, and often you're thinking about all of them, but you may find one of these ways is something that resonates the best with you. So we're going to take a look at that. So the first one is seed size. I basically split stuff into small seeded and large seeded crops, though I think you'll learn over time there's kind of a medium size in there as well. Then there's climate preference. Some stuff likes cool conditions, some stuff likes hot conditions, and many of you may know that already from just growing regular ground crops. And then the third thing is the crop cycle, and I break this into crops that are generally 10 days or less, or more than 10 days. So let's take a look at these in a little bit more detail. So looking at crops by seed size, one of the big difference here is a difference in sowing methods. One of them, that the lighter seeds, you're generally sprinkling them, whereas with the larger seed, you're spreading them across the soil. But there's a few things to consider here. The small seeded crops are generally more delicate. Some of these you often grow to the true leaf stage, so maybe like a lot of the little brassicas, and they tend to do well in the cooler conditions. They do have a higher seed price per unit weight, but you're also using less seed. So you find out generally your seed price per tray should generally be about the same as a large seeded crop. So the large seeded crops in general are much more hardy and forgiving. So these are some of the ones we looked at earlier, like sunflower, pea, and buckwheat. These ones have a much higher yield per area weight, so generally you're going to have a slightly lower price per unit weight on those as well. A lot of them have a very short cycle and do very well in handling climatic stress, so these can grow in a variety of conditions. They definitely have a lower seed price per unit weight, but you're often using more seed with each crop or with each sowing. And like I said, with a smaller seed, you're generally sprinkling it to sow, whereas these ones, you sort of dump them, the larger seed, you dump them and spread them across the soil surface. So here's a list of some of the smaller seeded crops that you might come across. Radish is one of those ones, I think, that kind of fits into the medium size, but generally these ones are much smaller. And you'll get a sense of that when you start working with them as well. So there's dozens and dozens of small seeded crops. And in general, you'll find, that most of the crops are actually small seeded. Radish is one that does stand out. I always think of it as a smaller seed that performs much like a large seed. And you'll kind of come up with your own relationships with the different crops over time as well. So the large seeded crops are stuff we've already talked about quite a bit. So sunflower is one of the most popular. It's quite a big seed. Pea shoots are another one. It's not only a big seed, but it's quite dense. Buckwheat as well, kind of in the medium to large seed category, but acts very much like a large seed. And then you get things like corn, which isn't something people tend to grow a lot of, but it is quite a big seed as well. So most of what I focus on in the beginning is actually on large seeded crops, because I do find they're the most easy to start with. So we can also look at crops by their climate preference. So we're just sort of seeing some of these lists again. And so some of our cool weather crops are listed here. So this might be something, if you live in a cooler environment, or you've got a bit of a microclimate that's shadier or something, and your cool weather crops are going to be more optimized, this might be the kind of stuff you focus on. And then you might actually find that you've got cool weather crops, but adding a little bit of heat allows you to grow the hot weather crops as well. Whereas it can sometimes be challenging to have hot weather conditions and grow the cool weather crops within that. It's very hard to bring temperature down. It tends to be generally easier to bring it up. And our hot weather crops, so sunflower, buckwheat, the popcorn again, and then stuff like basil. These are ones that, they can thrive in hot conditions. And some of them just do not do well unless they have a certain amount of heat. So once again, this is going to be dependent also on light, how long you soak the seed. It's going to depend on humidity, all these different factors, including the seed quality. So these are general guidelines to follow, but I can tell you we keep our greenhouse in very hot conditions to favor these types of crops. and we can grow a lot of the cool weather crops in there just fine. And we do that by specific management to keep them healthy. So the third way to look at crops is by their growth cycle. And my rule of thumb is to grow stuff that matures within 12 days or less. And some of the crops, like the ones I've listed here, they take longer than that. And the reason to not grow these crops is they take up valuable real estate. So when we think about pricing on microgreens, which we'll look at later, we're often looking at it based on how much yield you can get out of a tray. So let's just say with arugula, I can get 150 grams of arugula from a tray. Now let's say I can also get 150 grams of carrot microgreens from a tray. So in essence, the trays are fairly valued. But if it takes me 10 days to get the arugula and 30 days to get the carrot, that carrot actually needs to be priced at 3 times the price because I need to consider the real estate that it takes up. And if you're doing multiple crops at a time and you're doing 2 harvests a week, you could essentially have 6 to 8 cycles of carrots going at a time because it takes so long for that cycle. So they really take up a lot of space if you've got a longer crop cycle. And if that crop is taking up space, it means another crop is not. And we've just found, because we have a very tight system, the longer cycle crops don't work for us. However, if you have a good amount of space and you have the market for it, these are good ways to diversify your crops and maybe grow stuff that others aren't growing because they don't have the space. But you do have to sort of balance out whether the time that goes into it and the return on it is actually worth it. So those are 3 different ways to look at the microgreens. And what I find is I tend to take all into consideration, though I'm generally looking primarily at what the climate preference is, whether it's a hot weather or a cool weather crop.